Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you may be around the world today. And welcome to this fourth in the second series of HK45 Fireside Chats. My name is Eric Ng. I'm Managing Counsel of the HKIAC, and I'm very happy to also be one of the incoming co-chairs for the new HK45 committee, which was just impaneled in January of 2021. And myself, along with my two other co-chairs, Mr. Ben Burry and Ms. Joanne Lau, welcome you to this Fireside Chat, very important in our second series of Fireside Chats with all women practitioners. And today's chat is with Ms. Sapna Jhangiani QC. And I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Mariel Dimsey, who will be conducting and leading our chat today. Dr. Mariel Dimsey has been co-chair for HK45 for the last 2 years, and we're very, very happy to have learned from her over the last 2 years, and very happy as well that she still remains on committee as a normal member for at least another year so that she can help guide the work of this committee. She's an international commercial and investment arbitration specialist at CMS Hong Kong. She's acted as advisor and advocate in numerous international arbitrations covering a wide range of legal systems and industries. She also sits regularly as an arbitrator and has experience covering many arbitral institutions, including the HKIAC, ICC, DIS, and ad hoc proceedings. She's an Australian qualified lawyer as well as a qualified solicitor in Hong Kong, and she holds an LLM degree from the University of Cologne and a doctorate in law summa cum laude from the University of Basel. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Dimsey. I'm sure everyone is very anxious to get to the interview proper. So Mariel, over to you.
Thanks very much, Eric, for the kind introduction. I am very honoured and pleased today to be able to introduce Sapna Jhangiani QC as our guest for this HK45 Fireside Chat. As Eric mentioned, this is part of a second series that the HK45 is putting on about showcasing female talent in international arbitration, and we're very, very pleased that Sapna has agreed to be our guest in the hot seat today. Sapna really needs no introduction. She's practiced in London, New York, and Dubai, and she moved to Singapore and commenced her practice there in 2011, and she's a partner at Clyde & Co in Singapore. She's widely recognised in numerous directories as a leader in international arbitration, both in APAC and further afield. Sapna is admitted in England and Wales and Singapore, and she has experience in arbitration spanning a wide range of industries and governed by all the major institutional rules. She also regularly sits as arbitrator. On top of all that, and certainly not last but least, she was admitted as a QC in 2020, and she's the first female QC at her firm. So Sapna, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome, and we look forward to hearing about your journey today.
Mariel, thank you very much indeed. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank the HK45 for inviting me, but in particular, I'd like to thank Kiran Sangera. When she first invited me to this fireside chat, I explained to her that I don't really like talking about myself very much, but we both agreed that it's very important to get out of your comfort zone. It's something I strongly believe in, and we agreed that it's an important thing to do. And in particular, it's useful for practitioners to hear the stories and journeys of others within our field. So thank you, Kiran, for the encouragement. And thank you to Ben for coming up with some great questions just to get us thinking about what we would talk about today. Ben couldn't be here because it's his son's first birthday today. So happy birthday, Max.
Thanks, Sapna. Before we get into the interview proper, just let me mention a couple of housekeeping points. Of course, we're very pleased to have a large number of attendees today. If you have questions of Sapna, we would kindly ask that you put those in the Q&A in the Zoom platform. Sapna and I will be able to see them, and we'll either address them along the way, or we will save some time for them at the end. So without further ado, I think we will launch into the interview, Sapna. So I'd like to start at the beginning, of course, your background and your earlier years. So just a couple of years ago, of course. Who were your influences growing up?
Reflecting reflecting on this when preparing for today and thinking about my background and my influences. And when I think back to my childhood, I think one thing that stands out for me is that I went to a girls' school from the ages of 7 to 18. And we also had a woman prime minister at the time. So whilst now I'm very involved in discussions about gender diversity, actually growing up, it never occurred to me that being a woman could be career limiting in any way. At my school, we were really taught that women could do anything, and I still very strongly believe that. But I think it's only now, many years later, when I look around, that I do ask myself sometimes, where are all the women? It happens in my own firm at partner meetings. I've been the only female partner in Singapore for a few years now. It happened to me recently. I was in a meeting for the Rules Amendment Committee of an arbitral institution, and I think there were 10 people on the committee. We had a very long meeting recently, and it just occurred to me at the end of that meeting that I was the only woman on the committee. So I think that's all to say that I started off my career not realizing that there would be any difference in what women and men could do, and not expecting there to be any obstacles in advancing my career because of my gender. But I do think there's still a lot more work to be done when I look around now, as I say, many years later. The conversation is very much ongoing, but I do think that growing up, being in a girls' school did have a profound influence on how I approach these issues.
It's very interesting. I'm sure your school would be very, very pleased to hear that. As someone who also went to a girls' school for high school, I can echo that that was the general sentiment. So I'm glad that that empowered you to just go out and do what you've done. So moving forward a little bit, you studied your undergraduate degree at Oxford University in the mid-1990s. What's the most important and memorable thing you learned from your time at Oxford?
So I heard a saying recently, which is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to move to a different room. And I think that really embodies what I took away from Oxford. It's a very stimulating, vibrant environment with a lot of very smart people, very dynamic people, many of whom have skills and strengths I don't have. And I learned a lot just from being in that environment. And when I look around now, I actually think that our field of international arbitration is also a very vibrant, stimulating environment. I think I thrived in the environment at Oxford, and I think it's one of the reasons I thrive in our current field. When I look around, we have so many accomplished practitioners, many of whom speak so many languages, have great qualifications and credentials. I think it's a similarly stimulating environment and the kind of environment I like to be in.
Great. Sounds like it set the tone for your career, which is fantastic. So we're getting to the $1 million questions quite early. After you graduated, what made you decide to choose a career in law?
So funny enough, I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. There's probably not anybody watching this who is old enough to remember this TV show, but there was a TV show, I think in the 80s and 90s, called LA Law. And it was basically a show about US trial lawyers. And I think every episode they would have a trial. And I watched that show and I was hooked, and I just knew that was exactly what I wanted to do. And then I found out that in England at the time, traditionally it was barristers who did that kind of advocacy. So that was what I decided I wanted to be from a very young age.
Which you then went on to do, I understand. So I know that you were called to the Bar of England and Wales in 1999, and you were initially a barrister specialising in High Court work in London. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that time of your career.
So one of the things I should say is that any careers talks I went to about becoming a barrister really just emphasised how difficult it was and how many obstacles there were. And I have to say that none of those put me off. I knew that it'd be very difficult, but I think I was just driven forward by this relentless tenacity. Through sheer hard work, determination, I'm sure a little bit of luck, I did manage to get a pupillage. And my chosen field of law was defamation, because at that time, defamation trials were jury trials, and the top advocates at the bar would be lead counsel in these defamation jury trials. And I just thought it was such a glamorous, exciting world. We had, I think, Mohammed Al-Fayed suing Neil Hamilton. We had a case around the time I was doing pupillage, which I think was Richard Branson suing his biographer. So what attracted me to that area of the law was the advocacy, and I suppose a bit of the glamour. Of course, as a junior barrister, it wasn't actually glamorous at all. It actually tended to be, most defamation cases, I think at that level, at the junior level, were very much defamations related to council meetings or very small publications. But it was a fantastic learning experience, and I really learned a lot during pupillage, and I learned a lot from the barristers that I worked under when we worked in large teams. And I take the view in life that nothing is wasted, and I think I definitely took a lot away from the experience and absorbed a lot by osmosis.
Great. So what made you jump ship, so to speak, from being a barrister in London, and how did you glide your way into the field that you're currently in?
So I fell into international arbitration completely by chance. My husband is Canadian, and when he and I met, he was living in New York and I was living in London, and I wanted to move to New York and he wanted to move to London, and he won. So he moved to London, and I think I'd been in practice maybe, I'd been a tenant in defamation chambers maybe for around 4 years by then. But very quickly we took a joint decision that London wasn't going to be our long-term home. And so we started looking into opportunities to move abroad. And I realised that being a defamation barrister specialised in high court litigation wasn't going to be the way to get a job at the other end of the world. So I was going to have to reskill somewhat. And I had heard of international arbitration, and a friend had studied for a diploma at Queen Mary and said that that might be a good thing to think about if I was looking at working internationally. So I applied to the diploma, and even before I started the diploma, I applied to Clyde & Co for a job and managed to get that job. Even though I didn't have experience in international arbitration, I think the very fact that I had applied to study it showed a great interest. And then I started the course and I absolutely loved it, and I've never looked back.
That's fantastic. So you did your diploma in international arbitration, and I'm sorry if I'm getting any of this in the wrong order, just let me know. And then New York and Dubai called before you eventually ended up in Singapore. Could you tell us a little bit about that phase of your life?
Sure. And okay, so I should mention the role I took with Clyde & Co was in Dubai. And it was actually a fantastic role, because when I moved to Dubai, it was 2005, and Dubai was really growing exponentially at a really fast rate, and there were tons and tons of disputes, and immediately I was working on lots of arbitrations and having the opportunity to put into practice everything I was learning on my distance learning course from Queen Mary. So Dubai was a fantastic experience. And I should mention New York, actually, when I was at the bar as a tenant for the first 4 or 5 years of my career, I'd always been itching to move abroad. And of course, barristers don't get trainee seats such as you'd get if you were a trainee at a law firm, where you get this opportunity to do a seat of your training contract in an exotic location. We don't get any of that at the junior bar. but there are various scholarships available, and I applied really for any opportunity I could to move abroad. So the first scholarship I applied for was a human rights scholarship from Lincoln's Inn, because I had an interest in the right to freedom of expression and the right to privacy. They were a really important part of my area of practice at the defamation bar. And I successfully was awarded that scholarship, which gave me the opportunity to work at the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg and live abroad for a few months, which was wonderful. And then a couple of years later, I think in 2003, I applied for another scholarship to work in a scholarship which is granted to junior members of the bar who want to work in a Commonwealth country for 4 months. So I applied for that, and I managed to apply to Alan Novery to give me a sort of sabbatical for 3 or 4 months in New York. And that was a fantastic experience. And I think it really paved the way for joining Clyde & Co in 2005, because I got the experience of working for a law firm. And just really to give you an example of how different it is to work at the junior bar and work for a law firm, when you're a barrister, you have to buy your own desk, your own chair, your own computer. And when I turned up at Alan Novery's New York office on the first day of working there, obviously I didn't have to buy my own desk and computer, but I had a secretary, which I'd never had before. My secretary said, what time should the ergonomic consultant come and see you? I was thinking, ergonomic consultant? And it was standard that on your first day at Alan Novery's New York office, there would be an ergonomic consultant who would come to your desk and adjust your chair and tell you how to sit properly. And I just remember thinking, gosh, you know, I think I could get used to this. I was also given a flat in New York, which was walking distance from the office, which was the flat that was given to trainees. And I think I just loved the perks of the job. While I was there, I was working on a huge disclosure exercise in a large team. And although the actual work was very dry, I really enjoyed working in a team. And I left the experience in New York knowing that if I left the bar and worked for a law firm, I'd actually thrive and I'd adjust very well. And so I think it paved the way for joining Clyde & Co.'s Dubai office in 2005.
Thanks a lot. That's really interesting. I mean, I had no idea that there was this program for barristers where you could effectively go and substitute a trainee in a big firm and work with them for 4 months. So I'm glad you got that opportunity to see what the law firm life was like, because you obviously went back to it.
It's a bit
I think this is perhaps
sorry, it's a bit harder as a barrister because you have to find the job yourself, actually. So I got lots of rejections before Alan Novery were willing to give me a short sabbatical. But yes, sorry, Mariel.
No, that's very interesting. I mean, I know that one of the challenges of being a barrister, particularly when you're starting out, is that you do have to do everything yourself. You've now enlightened me that this also went down to buying your own desk and computer. So I can see how at that point of your career that the services that a large law firm provides are probably very attractive, but they obviously got you back. I thought perhaps since we're about to move on to sort of the later stage of your career, I thought this might be a good point for us to take a pause and for you to give us some tips, if you don't mind, about how you think what your key points are to forge a successful career, particularly as a younger associate and a younger lawyer practicing international arbitration.
I think that my key tip is to be very service oriented. And I'll give you an example of how I learned that very early in my career. My pupil mistress, one of the jobs we did at the junior bar was often drafting pleadings, particulars of claims, defence, etc. And when you file those pleadings in the English courts, you have the document, but then you have something called a back page, which is a bizarrely formatted version of the front page, Anybody who has done litigation in England will know what I'm talking about. If you don't, you may not. But it's a very difficult back page to format. It's a one page, and it sets out the name of the parties, but it's sort of in a half-page format. Anyway, so most barristers, if they were asked to draft a pleading, they would simply draft the pleading and send it off to solicitors. But my pupil mistress would draft the back page, which was just a difficult formatting job, which in my view, you wouldn't do unless you had to do it. So I said to her, why do you do the back page? No other barristers do the back page, and it's so fiddly, and you're taking your time doing something you don't have to do. And she said, yes, but if I do the back page, that's one less thing for my instructing solicitors to do, and I'm making their lives easier. And that really brought home to me that if you make people's lives easier, you'll really endear yourselves to them. So I think it's really important to be service oriented, always trying to add value, always trying to make the life easier of the person that you're trying to serve. And I think it will help you in 3 different ways. Firstly, I think it will help you progressing in a law firm. If you endear yourself to the partners who are giving you work, you will find yourself quite busy, and lots of partners will want to give you work. And frankly, that's really helpful, I think, in progressing in a law firm. Secondly, I think it will help you in building a practice in a law firm, because if you start thinking in a way, start thinking about how you can make your clients' lives easier and how you can really add value to them, again, I think it will endear yourself to clients. And lastly, but very importantly, I think it helps in advocacy, because I think it helps you focus on what can I do to make the tribunal's job easier? Would it be helpful to put this in a pictorial form or a diagram? Would it be helpful to set out a list of issues? I think if you always start thinking about what you can do to add value and make other people's lives easy, I think that will be my number 1 tip. And I learned it in a very clear way from that example I gave you.
That's a really interesting point, Sapna. I mean, I think going through law school in the way that I did, one of the areas that, of course, you touch on the law, but you don't really touch on the client aspect, or in some cases at all, until you actually get into practice. And I think for young lawyers, it's sometimes an actual conscious shift in mentality to go from, okay, this is the law and I know the law and I'm good at it and this is what I have to do, to actually remembering, and sometimes you remember it better than others, that you're a service provider and that you do need to make other people's lives easier as part of that, be it the clients or the tribunals, or in your example, counsel's case, with the pupil mistress doing something that she didn't necessarily have to do. But it was just something she could do, and it was she obviously worked out a way of doing it that was efficient and for her and making counsel's life easier. And of course, that's the kind of thing that would, I'm presuming, when you repeat work and establish a good reputation. So that kind of thing, I think, is very important.
I think none of us are indispensable, right? And we're operating in very competitive environments, whether you're within a law firm trying to advance your career, or you're trying to build a practice and compete for clients' work. We are in very competitive environments, and you can be a fantastic lawyer, and that's really important. But I think focusing on the service provider aspect of the job, I think it's really important. And you're absolutely right, it's not something that we're taught at law school.
So moving on a little bit, so you got to Singapore, I think, was it in 2011?
Yes.
And in 2015, you actually went on secondment for 6 months to Hilton's legal department. What did you learn from being on secondment at an in-house role?
So it's really an extension of what we were just talking about, which is I've had the opportunity to sit in the minds of the people that I am trying to serve, the clients I'm trying to serve, because I was a client. In that role, it was very useful for me because I did transactional work, which I've never done before. I've only ever handled disputes. So it was very useful for me to see the transactional side of business and to have to draft contracts. But even more importantly, In that role, I was supervising ongoing arbitration, so there was a contentious aspect to it as well. And I found myself in the bizarre situation of instructing external counsel on arbitrations. And it's funny because going into the role, I thought that my natural inclination would be that I'd want to sort of do all the work myself and sort of get really involved. But funnily enough, the absolute opposite happened because I was really busy carrying out the transactional aspects of my role. I didn't have the time to get really involved in the arbitrations. I really wanted external counsel to just take care of everything and just tell me exactly what they needed from me. And I actually found it was quite difficult, particularly in relation to one law firm that I was instructing, because they would send me really, really long emails when they needed to report to me or ask me for things that they needed, without any paragraph numbers or headings. And I was so busy in my transactional role. I remember sort of when I got a really long email from them, I'd look at it and I think, oh gosh, I'll have to save that for later. And sometimes I was so busy, later was sort of 2 days later. So I took away from that, you know, in-house counsel are really busy, and you need to make life easy for them. So my emails to clients now, they're always bullet pointed, there's headings. So if you even look at it very quickly, if you're just quickly, it pops up in your inbox and you just want to quickly see the gist of it, it'll be very easy to digest. And if I need instructions from counsel or from in-house counsel or any information, if there's anything I need from them, I will highlight that in red. So there's the rest of the text and then there's the red, which is this is what you need to do. So it's sort of little things like that. It really helped me be even more service oriented and communicate better with clients and really put myself in their position and understand what I could actually do to make their lives easier. The second point I would mention is I recall my first week on the secondment, and it was a part-time secondment. So I went back into the office and the partner that I reported to at that point said, how's it all going? And I said, oh, well, you know, I've been there a couple of days and we just seem to be on calls all the time. And we would be on global calls and we'd be on regional calls, and there were lots and lots of calls. And I couldn't understand why we needed to talk so much. And I said to him, you know, I've got a lot of work to do. I have to do all the calls. And then I'm worried I'm not getting enough time to actually do the written work. But I left that role really understanding the importance of good communication, particularly in a large organization, because in a large organization, you need to have that level of connection. Otherwise, everybody is in their silos and reinventing the wheel separately. But if you talk regularly and you have really excellent communication globally, you can really help each other and you can share shortcuts, you can share information. So I really learned the value of communication within a big organization. And I think it also helps me put myself into the minds of clients when they are navigating their own organizations. I try and imagine some of the obstacles they may have and any suggestions I may have to help them communicate better internally and frankly manage the expectations of their stakeholders, which is a big part of the in-house counsel job. So I think those are probably the two main takeaways.
That's really interesting, because I think you've gone essentially from one extreme to the other. You started out as a barrister where you were in almost every sense of the word on your own, to being one sort of nook in a huge apparatus that was required to report back and manage multiple things at one time, deal with external counsel, a role that you would normally be in yourself. So they must have provided you with some very invaluable perspective on how to do the private practice role, with the benefit of those two extremes that you'd experienced in that way. In terms of perspective, I think now might be a good point for some reflection, if you don't mind. If you had a chance to give your younger self one good piece of advice, what would it be?
I think that the main piece of advice would be to avoid perfectionism. It's been said that perfectionism is the enemy of good. Sheryl Sandberg went one step further and just said perfection is the enemy, full stop. I think that a lot of high achievers, particularly women, but I think it applies to both women and men, hold themselves up to standards of perfection in both their personal and professional lives. And I just think that often if you're in that cycle, it creates a lot of fear of failure, so that you actually prevent yourself from trying really difficult things, putting yourself forward for challenges, getting out of your comfort zone. I think that real growth comes from tackling very hard challenges. And so I think that a cycle of perfectionism can really prevent that kind of growth. I remember Sue Provisa QC, when she was interviewed on the Fireside Chat series, she said, no one has all the answers. And that's absolutely true. But I think as lawyers, we feel very compelled to give the impression that we do have all the answers, and we absolutely don't. So I think that I would tell myself, I've obviously, as you can hear, I've kicked the habit of perfectionism. I'm all about learning from failures, making mistakes, learning from mistakes, and really aiming for growth. But I think I would probably have told myself to kick the habit earlier than I did.
And when did you kick the habit? Is there a point in your career that you can pinpoint and say, this was when I realized it didn't have to be perfect?
It's a great question, Mariel. You know, I think part of it came from juggling lots of different things. Especially, I think, perhaps being a young mother. I had a friend who was a partner at a magic circle law firm, and she'd always said to me, oh, you know, I think that I'm failing at motherhood and I'm not quite doing good enough in that part of my life, and I'm also failing at my job, so it's a very unsatisfactory situation. And she ended up just leaving. She completely left private practice. And so I think that what I think it was probably when I was dealing with the demands of being a young mother and just realizing I'm not going to get everything right. There is absolutely no recipe for perfection. I remember I saw an interview with Kathy Engelbert, who was formerly the CEO of Deloitte. And she said that she always liked to avoid the use of the phrase work-life balance, because it suggests that there's this utopian balance that we can all aim for, and that's just not real life. She said she prefers the phrase work-life integration. And I can see the benefits in seeing things that way. And I think that where you land up is that, you know, nothing in life is perfect. I think it's really important to appreciate that, particularly nowadays when we're in an era of social media, and we see a lot of rosy stories on social media, which is great. But I think that life can be chaotic sometimes, and I think that giving up perfectionism brings with it a certain sense of acceptance. And so, yes, I think to answer your question directly, it would probably, when I realized in my life that I was juggling many, many different things, and I was never going to achieve perfection, if that was ever possible, in any sphere, that what I say to myself is really do the best that you can with the resources you have in any situation, whether that's a situation at work or it's a situation at home. It's not an exercise in perfection, it's an exercise in doing the very best you can with the resources you have.
Thanks very much for that, Sapna. I mean, I think from an outside perspective that we could argue with you about whether or not perfectionism has diminished in your life, at least looking in from where we are right now. But I think it's very refreshing that you can give that kind of insight, and I'm sure it echoes with many of the people who are listening today. Now, just moving on to when you went back to private practice after your secondment. Now, you're a partner at Clyde & Co, and I understood that you said at the beginning that you're the only female partner in the Singapore office. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, this is not necessarily a gender question, but I'm assuming there might be some gender-related elements to it. But obviously, for many associates, one of the most difficult parts of their career is when they go up through the ranks to senior associate and are trying to navigate their way into partnership. So what advice would you give for associates who are at that stage and trying to make that jump to partnership?
So I think I'd have three pieces of advice. The first would be the importance of mentorship within your firm. I think that in progressing in any institution, you need people who will advocate for you. That's certainly been my experience. In my firm, when you apply for partnership, you need to have 2 sponsors. So you need advocates, and you need to start thinking really at quite an early stage, if that's what you want to aim for, who are going to be your advocates. And they usually have to be fairly senior partners within the firm. And it may be different in every firm, but I think the importance of identifying advocates and sponsors, which I would also call mentors. Secondly, my second piece of advice is start thinking really early of law as a business. It took me personally quite a while to pick up this way of thinking. And I think for me, it stems from the fact that I started my career at the bar. And I know it's different in Hong Kong, but in England, we have clerks, and they deal with all the money aspects of barristers' lives. So barristers in England, we don't negotiate fees. We don't issue invoices. We don't get involved in any of that. I do know it's different in Hong Kong. So I expect that Hong Kong barristers are very business-minded. But I think it took me a long time to start seeing law as a business, even once I worked into a law firm. I think another reason is I absolutely love what I do. I really enjoy it. And I think I had to sort of get round this idea of charging a premium for what you do, even though you really enjoy it, because of what you're able to offer. And I think the third piece of advice I would give is to remember that a career is a marathon and not a sprint. I mean, I've been in practice for 20 years now, and I still very much think that I'm only halfway through my career. And I think there can often be a real sense of urgency in applying for partnership. From my own experience, it took me actually fairly a long time. And in the sort of 4 or 5 years in my lead up to partnership, I was actually on a 4-day week. I had young children at the time, and I worked really hard to negotiate that arrangement with great difficulty. And I don't think it necessarily slowed down my journey to partnership, because it was very important to me that all of those in the firm understood that even though I may have a slightly different working arrangement, I wasn't any less hardworking, I wasn't any less ambitious. And on the day that I was not in the office, I had a really great team, and I always worked with juniors in the team who would always pick up whatever was needed, and I would be available on email. But yes, it did take me a while. So yeah, remember that a career is a marathon. You will get to where you need to get eventually if you keep aiming, as I say, if you have relentless tenacity, but you don't have to get there immediately. Enjoy the journey.
I think that's really good advice, Sapna. I mean, as a young associate, I was very impatient, and I'm sure I speak for quite a few others who are in a similar situation. And I think, as you said before, going along the way and realizing that what you're learning and what you're experiencing, none of it's going to be wasted. And I think that's a very good message for people out there to keep in mind. Now, you've certainly been busy in the last couple of years, so I'd like to turn to that phase, if that's okay with you. Now, I understand that you were admitted as an advocate and solicitor in Singapore in 2019. What prompted this, and what did the process involve?
So I think what prompted it, again, was trying to be of service to clients. Again, that focus always on being a service provider, because what was happening was that I would handle my cases, and then if there was any element of Singapore litigation involved, I would have to hand over the case completely to somebody else, because there's quite strict rules in Singapore, and if you're not Singapore qualified, you really cannot help on litigation at all. And it was very hard for me to give my cases away and not be able to have any involvement, because I really focused on offering a bespoke service to clients, and I really wanted to be involved. So I think that's what prompted it. I wanted to be able to offer a one-stop service to clients that had disputes. I mean, including if you have arbitration seated in Singapore, it's quite possible that you will have court proceedings related to the arbitration or set-aside proceedings or whatever. So that's what prompted it. In terms of the process, it's quite a difficult application process to become called to the Singapore bar, particularly if you're a foreigner. So I had to apply for a special exemption to the Ministry of Law. And the first time I applied, I was rejected. But again, undeterred, I applied again a couple of years later, and on this occasion I was successful. But I said that I wanted to do the Singapore law exams because I wanted to actually understand Singapore law. So I had to do the exams, and I think they were the most difficult exams I've ever done. But anyway, I'm very proud of having got through that process, having persevered and done the exams, etc. It is a matter of great pride for me.
Well, congratulations. I mean, everything I've heard about qualifying in Singapore is that it's no mean feat, and that it's incredibly difficult to actually get there. So congratulations on that. Sounds like an amazing achievement. And speaking of amazing achievements, it would be remiss of me not to congratulate you on being appointed as Queen's Counsel last year. That's also incredible, and it's a rare event in international arbitration, and especially among female arbitration practitioners. So I'm sure you must be very proud of that achievement. And of course, we'd all like to know how it came about, and also the process for getting this very serious accolade.
Thank you very much. And I guess I just want to say that we have more and more international arbitration practitioners who are taking silk, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think it's great for our field, and it shows that we really have the strength of advocacy in our field. So I hope that trend of having at least some international arbitration practitioners every year taking silk, I hope that it continues. In terms of the process, it is, I think it's fair to say it is a difficult process. It's a very long application form. You have to give many referees. I think I gave 30 names of referees. And I think what's most arduous about it is it's a really long process. I think it's a year-long process, and it's just very nerve-wracking. So yes, it was I think it almost took me a year to recover from the process, to be honest. But I had told myself that if I was not successful, I would reapply the following year. It is not unusual to not succeed, but to reapply and be successful. And I think that when I found out, I was just so relieved I wouldn't have to go through the whole year-long process again. But that soon gave way to absolute delight, and the day was very special. And we'd found out the day before that Singapore had closed their borders. So on the day that I took silk, I knew that when my family and I went back to Singapore, we'd be stuck at home, unable to leave our apartment for 14 days. So I really made the most of the day, and it was very special. And I think I remember seeing on LinkedIn this morning, Kieran asking about what it was like to wear the wig. And I just have to say, the wig was actually quite itchy, but I think that the thing I'd like to say is it's actually like being at a costume party for the whole day. The pupil, my fellow pupil from my former chambers, took silk on the same day, and my former chambers had a party at lunchtime. So it was just a great fun day. Yes, and it was like being in fancy dress for the whole day.
Sounds amazing. I'm glad you made a special day out of it, especially with the knowledge that you were coming back to a very different environment back in Asia. So turning to sort of the day job, and anyone being a lawyer is not always winning massive cases like what you saw on LA Law back in the 80s, which I do remember, by the way. How do you deliver negative advice to clients? Have you got any tips on that?
I don't have any difficulty being blunt and straight with clients. I think that's what clients expect. Very recently, a partner from another law firm had instructed me to assist on an English law advice, and I thought the claim was hopeless, and I said so. And I said, but you know, if you find evidence of X, Y, and Z, you might possibly have a claim, but the prospect of getting this evidence seemed very remote. And the lawyer said to me, oh, can you just make the advice, you know, a bit more positive? And I said, well, I can more positively say that if you find X, Y, and Z, then you might have a case, but fine, okay, we'll mend it very slightly. And the client in-house counsel came back 2 weeks later and said, this advice is too positive. I think our commercial team will think they've actually got a prospect of success, and we share your view that it's probably hopeless. Can you make it a bit more negative? So I think the moral of that story is, you know, we owe it to clients to give them negative advice. That's really what they pay us for. So I've never had any difficulty with that.
Couldn't agree more. Turning to my next question, and perhaps this flows very nicely from what we just discussed. If there's one thing you could change about international arbitration today, what would it be?
I think that we've settled into very standard ways of doing things in the procedures of international arbitration. I think, you know, most tribunals now will have a standard procedural order number 1, which will cover all possible permutations. I've seen procedural order number 1 versions that tell you exactly what paper size you should have. And I think that these procedural order number 1s are often distributed before you even have the first case management conference. And then the parties don't change very much because the draft is already there. And I think there is room for much more creative blue sky thinking about the way that we do things. I think really we have standard timetables now. We have one avenue for memorial style pleadings, one avenue for traditional style pleadings, if I can call them that. And I think that we're not taking full advantage of the flexibility in the process, and we're not unlocking all the possibilities that are there. So I would like to see more of that, and sort of connected to that, I think we've developed very standard ways of hearing witness evidence. I was just part of the task force of the ICC that came up with a recent report on the reliability and accuracy of witness evidence. And I think there's a few things that will come out of that report that I hope will have an impact on the way that we hear witness evidence, the way we prepare witness evidence. I think we need to stand back and take a long, hard look at where we've reached, and also make a conscious effort to avoid international arbitration procedure becoming very standardized. And I do think that there's a risk of that.
Speaking of where we've reached, so Sapna in high school, being empowered to do anything. Now Sapna as a partner in QC, one thing I have to ask, of course, is what your opinions are on diversity in the profession. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you that there are various initiatives out there, and I'm sure you're very well aware of them and are involved in most of them. But what are your opinions on this? Where are we in the grand scheme of things? Is diversity a necessary part of arbitration? Do we get better decisions with diverse panels? Those kind of issues I'd be very interested in your views on.
So as for the question, do diverse panels make better decisions? There's lots of data from analysing the impact on companies and on decisions of diverse boards of directors. I haven't seen any data on the impact on decisions of diverse arbitral tribunals, but I'm sure that the principle must be the same. If everybody thinks the same and is from exactly the same background, then nobody is challenging the status quo. No one's bringing in new ideas, and no one's sort of saying, well, what if you look at it this way? So I think that's got to be accepted as axiomatic. In terms of where we are on diversity in our field, I mean, if I look back to 15 years ago, we weren't even having the types of conversations that we are having now. And the very fact that we are having them is fantastic. We need to keep having them. There's still a long way to go, but I think we have some fantastic initiatives. I think the Equal Pledge on International Arbitration really started the conversation. It at least got women on shortlists of candidates for arbitrators. I'm still not sure that they're actually the people who are getting selected from those shortlists, but we're heading in the right direction, even though there's still a lot more work to be done.
Thank you for that. Turning to your role as advocate, which based on your QC designation, I'm sure is a very significant part of your practice. Do you think that your training as a barrister, even in a quite unrelated field, has made you a better advocate for
The answer is yes.
Arbitration?
Definitely, but I don't think that's to say that if you didn't start your career off as a barrister, you couldn't be a fantastic advocate. You absolutely could. I think it really comes back to nothing is wasted, and you've really, for me certainly, I treat this career as an opportunity to learn all the time, and so I definitely took away a lot of learnings from that stage of my career.
And what's the most important thing you've learned in your arbitration career in relation to how you conduct your advocacy?
Develop your own style. I think it's so important. And I think for me, it's so important because of where I started. When I started at Chambers, I don't know how to put this, a lot of the senior members of Chambers were just very different from me. I'd see them in court. I remember our head of Chambers, I once saw him in court, and he made lots of references to Greek mythological characters. I think only he and the judge understood. And I remember thinking, well, I don't think I could ever do that. I don't even have reference points for what he's referring to. But that's the point. I don't have to do advocacy like that. That's his style of advocacy, and it's brilliant and it works for him. But I think it's so important that you have to find what works for you, and there is not one size fits all. You've got to find a style that works for you, and if you focus on preparation and being really, really well prepared, that will take you very far.
So I'm assuming in your role, and particularly your uniqueness as being a QC and your tenacity in getting the solicitor qualification in Singapore, that you must be a mentor for many people, whether you're aware of it or not, I'm sure in some cases. What is your number one tip for mentees, and particularly for the female mentees you have?
Okay, yes, true, I do have mentees. I also have lots of mentors. And the one thing I would say is I think that the mentorship relationship is very two-way. I have mentees who I also learn a lot from. I think my main tip would be to be encouraged and to be encouraging. As I say, I've had mentees who've encouraged me to go for very difficult things or aim for certain challenges. And if we're thinking about women in particular, I don't think this is unique to women, because I'm aware of men who find themselves in the same situation. But on the whole, women can suffer from periods of low confidence. And just to give you an example, I just finished reading the autobiography of Michelle Obama, and there's a theme throughout the book, which is she asks herself frequently, again and again, at various points in her life, am I good enough? I watched a documentary which featured Sheryl Sandberg recently, and she said that she suffers from periods of low confidence, and she had a coach get her to write down at the end of every day 3 things that she did well. And I think this is very connected also to imposter syndrome, which I think affects men and women. But I think it's really important to encourage each other. And I think it's also really important for people to be very honest about the challenges they have faced in life, including challenges of low confidence. I think it's very important. Something that I have in particular benefited from is having a very wide support network. So build a support network, and as part of in being part of that network, encourage each other, be encouraged, encourage each other to challenge yourselves so that you can really try and build your full potential and ultimately aim for growth.
Very good advice. I have to say, I think with this whole COVID situation, we've all been reminded in the best possible way that we're all in the same boat here. And some of your comments just then struck with me, particularly in the context of what we're going through. And everyone, I get the impression at least, is trying to be a little bit more kinder and understanding to each other. So I think that all flows together very well. As someone who has a leadership position in a law firm and in the community, what do you consider to be attributes of a good leader?
I think, sorry, I'm just checking the time. Humility is very important. It really comes back to being open about the fact that you don't have all the answers, being very aware of your weaknesses, but also being aware of your strengths. And aware that everybody makes mistakes, and it's really important to try and sort of learn from those mistakes rather than focus on the fact that someone's made a mistake. Mistakes happen, that's definitely life. I learned what not to do from a partner I once reported to, which was every time I did some good work, he would take credit for it. And every time anyone in his team made a mistake, he would definitely throw them under the bus. So I try and do the opposite. If a member of my team does great work, I want everyone to know, I want the client to know that it was their idea. I think leaders look better when they have fantastic teams. And I think that it's great for people to know that their work is valuable and meaningful and appreciated. I also think one thing I learned from my boss I had for 10 years, who was fantastic, is having great listening skills really helps. And that is something that I am always trying to work on.
Well, we've listened to you now for almost an hour, and I'm amazed at your tenacity to get through this, and we've certainly asked a lot of questions. So I think we might end on a light note, if that's okay with you. And we've got a couple of sort of quick fire questions to lighten the mood towards the end after all this wonderful advice. So who, living or dead, would you like to have dinner with, and why?
I think that would have to just be a dear friend who lives in California, who I've not seen for years, and I now don't envisage seeing for a really long time. I would love to have dinner with her.
Recent book or film, or both, that you've enjoyed?
So my friend from California sent me a book for Christmas called This Is Marketing. It's got nothing to do with law. It's really about the psychology that makes people buy. It's really short, really easy to read. I highly recommend it. It's by an author called Seth Godin. Oh, sorry, also, did you...
And the question that's on... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I remember if you said I could mention a film as well. I can't think of a film, but if anyone hasn't seen The Last Dance on Netflix, I highly recommend it. It's really about the drive to succeed and be the best. It's fascinating.
Great. And the question that is on everyone's lips, and you know, I'm guilty of scrolling through the occasional travel websites myself at the moment. When it becomes possible to travel normally again, where will you go first?
I think the answer to that has to be anywhere, but in all honesty, I can say I think I will probably visit Hong Kong. Since I've lived in Singapore, I visited Hong Kong at least a couple of times a year, whether for work or for a holiday. My best friend from childhood lives there. I have clients there. I have peers there who I like to visit, and I just love how vibrant the city is, and it's one of my absolute favourite places to be, and I can't wait to visit it again.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you for the free ad for Hong Kong. Now, we're almost on time, but I've just seen a questions come in from one of the audience's members. Is there anything that you would have done differently?
Oh, that is a great question. Well, listen, as I've has been really a theme of today, you make mistakes in life and you get rejections and you do difficult things and you grow and you learn. So yes, I'm sure there are some things that I wish had happened differently, but at the end of the day, again, nothing is wasted. And I'm really grateful for where I am and what I have, both on a personal and professional basis. And I feel very lucky. So I suppose there's nothing in particular that I would look back on and say, no, I wish that wouldn't have happened, because I don't know if it's part of what was meant to bring me where I am now.
Well, I think that's a very nice philosophical note on which to end this. Thank you so much for your honest and frank and insightful and inspiring, quite frankly, answers to all of these questions. I think this was an incredibly valuable experience for me personally, and I hope so for our listeners as well. So thank you very much that we could take an hour of your time to hear about your wonderful experiences and your career path so far.
Mariel, thank you so much. Thank you so much for moderating. This was really an absolute pleasure for me.